Ok, boa tarde todo mundo, como estamos todos, sejam bem-vindos. Eu sou a Annelise do EducationUSA, a fonte oficial de informações sobre estudos dos Estados Unidos. Temos uma rede aqui no Brasil de 39 escritórios espalhados pelo nosso país, com orientadores treinados que oferecem informações sobre estudos nos Estados Unidos em nível superior, graduação, mestrado, doutorado e também oportunidades de cursos de inglês. O EducationUSA costuma organizar esses webinars, são eventos como esse que estamos fazendo hoje para trazer informações em primeira mão das instituições americanas, as 4.500 universidades que oferecem programas, e também de organizações que viabilizam oportunidades como os Sports Scholarships, as bolsas esportivas que são tão buscadas em nossas orientações, junto aos nossos escritórios. Então, nós estamos muito felizes que hoje estamos recebendo um representante do NCAA, que é a Associação Nacional Atlética, que congrega todas as informações sobre os atletas universitários nos Estados Unidos. E eu estou iniciando essa apresentação em português, porque estamos com muitos convidados, muitos alunos e pessoas que foram convidadas pelos centros binacionais, que estão nos vindo participar dessa atividade conosco. São 7 binacionais que sabemos que se mobilizaram para convidar sua comunidade para aproveitar essa oportunidade e ouvir essa apresentação. Ela será gravada e disponibilizada posteriormente. Então, e também como ela vai ser em inglês, por isso quis fazer essa apresentação agora. Nós vamos ter o Vince Gamerek, que está aqui visualmente disponível, e o Vince é responsável pela, se a gente for traduzir, pela análise de elegibilidade dos potenciais atletas universitários. Vai explicar para nós como se dá a candidatura e a elegibilidade para obter uma bolsa de esportes nos Estados Unidos para estudar, fazendo college, fazendo uma faculdade, com o benefício de uma bolsa esportiva. E eu estou aqui com vários advisors da nossa rede, eu também dou as boas-vindas, sei que alguns deles têm colaborado com a gente para a divulgação também nas nossas atividades nesses binacionais. Então, todos são muito bem-vindos. Tenho aqui minha colega Simone Ferreira, Simone está aqui também, que foi a pessoa que viabilizou essa apresentação, com contato com a Elizabeth Thompson, que é a diretora do NCAA, que nos trouxe essa apresentação com o Vince. Então, antes de eu passar a palavra, vou pedir que todos deixem, por favor, como todos já fizeram, seus microfones fechados, e no final da apresentação nós vamos dar um espaço para vocês nos colocarem as perguntas ali no bate-papo. Nós vamos procurar ir lendo e passando para o Vince, para que ele vá respondendo, tá? Nos últimos 20 minutos. E no final, nós também vamos pedir para todos vocês que liberem os seus e-mails, seus endereços de e-mails, nós vamos passar para o NCAA, para que eles mandem um follow-up para vocês com links, com todas as informações sobre os programas e sobre o próprio application para o Sports College. Bom? So, I will transition to English to welcome Vince Gamerek, if I'm saying that correctly. Welcome, Vince. Vince is a coordinator of eligibility analysis of NCAA and is joining us this afternoon to talk about college scholarships, right? And we have here, Vince, 26 people with us at the moment. We have more people joining us soon. Okay, I'll ask people to turn off their mics. I'm sorry. Matheus Rodrigues, pode fechar seu microfone, por favor? Sorry, Vince, give me 1 second and
that's okay.
We can transition to you. Yes, he turned it off. So thank you, Vince, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Vince Gimmerick, and I'm just here to talk about college sports in general. Just a little bit of background on me. Let's see here, make sure the PowerPoint works. Just to mention it up front, I don't know if it was mentioned in the Portuguese introduction there, but I do have access to the chat boxes. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat box. And then when we get to the end of the presentation, I'll try to answer anything that I can. Obviously, if you have more questions, we're going to have lots of contact information for us at the NCAA at the end of this presentation. So there's plenty of ways for you to get a hold of us and ask your specific questions about your specific student, or really anything else you're curious about. As I mentioned, my name is Vince Gimmerick. My official title here at the NCAA is I'm a coordinator of eligibility and analysis. I have been working at the NCAA for about the past 5 years, and I have focused solely on international students for about 4 years now. So my day-to-day job is I work directly with NCAA schools, and I work with prospective student athletes to answer any questions they have to hopefully get them eligible so that they're able to play college sports. So we've got some, give me one second, I just have to move some boxes. Let me see here. All right. So some really basic questions here. What is the NCAA? How do I become eligible? And then we've got some resources and some information about other topics for you. We're going to go through each of these in turn. And like I said, I will do my best to explain them, but I'll also try to keep it brief. So if you end up having specific questions or there's something I don't touch on, feel free to ask that, and we will go ahead and try to get you the answers to that once the general presentation is over. Let me see here. All right. So what are the options if you want to come and play college sports? Well, the NCAA is just one of several different sports associations that governs college sports in the United States of America. The main three options are the NAIA, the NJCAA, and then us, the NCAA. All three of those groups are collections of different colleges and universities in the United States that offer college sports programs. We're all separate, but we all serve similar functions. Now, it's important to distinguish between competitive teams and intramural and club teams. As noted on the slide here, intramural and club teams do not offer athletic scholarships, whereas other teams usually do. Clubs compete against other club teams from other schools, and then intramural teams just compete internally at one particular school. Here at the NCAA, we have 3 divisions, Division 1, 2, and 3, and only Divisions 1 and 2 offer athletic scholarships. Division 3 does not allow athletic scholarships to be offered. So just some background on us as an association, who we are, and a little bit about what we do. We are a collection of over 1,100 colleges and universities in the United States and 1 in Canada. We have almost 500,000 active student athletes every year. So that means there are 500,000 active NCAA athletes right now in the United States. That's 19,500 different teams, 90 different championship events. We offer 24 sports, and we have 3 different divisions. So here's the big question for students that are not yet in college, and the question is, how do I become eligible? Well, luckily we walk you through the entire process, and the process starts by registering at our website, which is eligibilitycenter.org. When you register at eligibilitycenter.org, you have an option. You can either choose to pay for a certification account, or you can create a free profile page, and that way you can get more information about the process and find out maybe which path is best for you. The nice part is if you register for the free profile page, you can then later upgrade that into a paid certification account at any time, and there's no risk for creating a profile page. When you need a certification account is if you know you want to be an NCAA Division I or Division II athlete. Ultimately, you will have to create a certification account that will allow us to certify you based on your academic and amateurism credentials. We'll talk a lot about that here coming up soon, but we do want to encourage absolutely everyone to create those free profile pages, because like I said, you can create the profile page, and then if later you decide you want to upgrade it to the paid account, you can do that, no problem. So we have some very specific initial eligibility standards because we have a commitment to academics that ensures that students are better equipped to succeed in college and prepare for lifelong success. Our basic philosophy is you should focus on your academics first, and then athletics should follow that. So if you're not able to keep up with your academics, we want to help you get there before we also burden you with additional athletic responsibilities. So here are our initial eligibility academic standards. To play NCAA Division I or II sports, student athletes, and this is all student athletes from all countries, need to meet the following academic requirements. You need to present an acceptable form of proof of secondary school graduation, complete at least 16 NCAA approved core courses in the correct subjects, need to earn a minimum grade point average of 2.30, and then you need to earn an SAT combined score or ACT sum score that matches our sliding scale requirements. Now, I realize that was a ton of information that probably sounded like a lot of crazy words to a lot of you. We'll talk about each of those things here coming up, and what all of those terms mean in particular. So I had mentioned that you have to complete 16 core courses in order to be eligible for NCAA Division I or Division II. Here's the list of Division I required core courses. You have to have 4 credits of English or native language. You have to have 2 credits of natural or physical science, 3 credits of math at the Algebra 1 or higher level, 2 credits of social science, 1 credit of additional anything listed previously, and then 4 more credits of additional English, native language, math, science, social science, foreign language, comparative religion, or philosophy. So just breaking these down for you very basically, an English course is obviously going to fall into the English category. For students in Brazil, Portuguese would be considered the native language. Natural or physical science is going to be any of the normal sciences, so physics or chemistry or biology, courses like that. Mathematics is pretty self-explanatory. Social science would be history, geography, psychology, courses like that. And then last, in the very final category, we have foreign language, comparative religion, or philosophy. So what we consider to be a foreign language is going to be different for every country. For example, a student taking German in Brazil, we would consider that to be a foreign language because German is not a native language for Brazil. So here are the Division II requirements. You will notice that the categories are all exactly the same as Division I. The only difference between the 2 divisions is the credit breakdown under each category is slightly different. Both Division I and Division II require 16 core courses, but the number of courses they require in each category is just slightly different. The only real difference is in the additional English, native language, math, or natural physical science category. Division II allows a little bit more flexibility than Division I in allowing students to take courses in more subject areas and not having as strict of requirements as Division I. Most of the time though, if students are meeting the requirements for one division, they're very often meeting the requirements for the other division. So if you're worried about maybe meeting the requirements for one division and not the other, please feel free to contact us. We're happy to walk you through exactly how it works. So that way you don't have to worry about your specific situation. Almost always though, if you're meeting the requirements for one, you're very likely meeting the requirements for the other one. So here's just a brief overview of documents that we require. We require academic records for years 9 and up in the native language and a certified line-by-line English translation of those documents. What that means is you would want to submit your transcripts in Portuguese, and then we would want to see an English version of those same documents. And if we looked at the two side by side, we would want them to look as similar as possible, but one would be in Portuguese and one would be in English. That's the goal. It's not a specific requirement that they look exactly the same, but that's always very helpful to us when we're looking at the documents, and really smooths out the process and makes it really easy. Important to note here, and we'll talk more about Brazil in particular later, generally for students from Brazil, we only need the ensino medio. So we need your academic documents from your secondary school years. Typically, those are only going to end up being 3 years of courses. Rarely do we need ensino fundamental documents. Sometimes we do, but for most Brazilian students, we do not need the ensino fundamental. So we also require proof of graduation, including any certificates or diplomas or final leaving exams. Again, for students from Brazil, all we end up needing is a final ensino medio transcript, and that satisfies our proof of graduation requirements for Brazilians. All students that want to compete at the NCAA Division I or II level need to take the SAT or ACT if they need to be an initial qualifier leaving secondary school. Some students choose to first come to a different American college, or maybe they go to a Brazilian university first. Those students may or may not need to take the SAT or ACT, but if you want to go straight from your ensino medio into your NCAA school, you will need to take the SAT or ACT. Also importantly, we do not, meaning the NCAA does not, request or use TOEFL scores or TOEFL scores for any purpose. However, it's very, very likely that your NCAA school itself will need you to take that test for admissions purposes. So when you decide which NCAA school you think you would like to attend, you will want to work with that school directly to figure out what documents they require from you and to see if they would like you to take the TOEFL or not. We don't use it, but almost all of the schools will need you to do that. So those are our academic requirements, a brief overview of the documents that we need and what we need to get everything finalized on the academic side. We also are going to ask you questions about your sports participation and your what we call your amateurism certification. Essentially what that review is looking at is whether you have been considered to be a professional athlete in your sport or whether you are still considered an amateur athlete in your sport. Here are just some general guidelines that will help you stay eligible to compete in college sports before you enroll as a full-time student at your NCAA school. So the amateurism certification process reviews a lot of information. Luckily, most of this information is what we review. We don't typically require a lot of responses from the students themselves, but sometimes we need your help to fill in the gaps and answer some questions we might have. Very importantly, the main issue that we review is if you delay your full-time collegiate enrollment to participate in organized competition. What that means is our rules have very strict requirements that make us compare when you graduate from secondary school and then when you enroll at your NCAA school or other university or college. For most sports, you are allowed a 1-year gap between high school and post-secondary enrollment, like at your NCAA school. I know we probably have a lot of soccer players in Brazil. Soccer is a one-year sport. The only sport that is an exception is tennis. For tennis, you only have 6 months before you're then allowed, before then you would want to enroll at your NCAA school, or you can stop competing. So just to walk through some hypothetical examples for you here, say a student finishes their ensino medio in December of 2019 and they play soccer, they would then want to enroll at their NCAA school no later than January of 2021, because they would have the entire year of 2020 as what we call their grace period, and then they would want to enroll in 2021 or stop playing soccer until they enroll at their NCAA school. For a tennis athlete, however, if they finish their ensino medio in December of 2019, they would then want to enroll at their NCAA school in the fall, or roughly August of 2020, because they only have 6 months and not a year. Again, very important to understand that this rule exists, but if you have specific questions about your situation or your student, absolutely please reach out to us and we will walk them through exactly what their particular timeline looks like and their deadlines, because they change per student and per sport based on the facts that are applicable to that specific student. So that's the delayed enrollment rule. That's the big one. Then we're also going to ask questions about whether you have played your sport with professional athletes, whether you have signed a contract with a professional team, whether you have participated in tryouts or practices with a professional team, whether you have ever accepted any payment or preferential treatment for being an athlete or playing sports, whether you've competed and won any prize money as an athlete, whether you have accepted benefits from an agent or prospective agent, whether you have any involvement with a recruiting service. And again, if you have any questions about any of these things, absolutely reach out to us and ask us questions. All of the bullet points on the list here are not necessarily things students cannot do, but there is going to be a line that students cannot cross. And the lines are very specific and different for each situation. We always recommend, before engaging in any new relationship, or if you have questions about signing a contract or an agreement with someone, reach out to us first, and then we can properly advise whether you should or should not engage in that activity before you potentially get in trouble. So we have many, many resources available on our website as well, discussing amateurism and initial eligibility. Here are just some of the resources and some handy links for you. So we've got several different websites. We've got ncaa.org/playcollegesports, ncaa.org/student-athletes/future/international-student-athletes. That will take you to our international specific pages. That can also be very easily found via searching on our website itself. Our last website is our Eligibility Center website, the same place that all students go to register, and that is eligibilitycenter.org. We also have two separate Twitter accounts. I'm sorry, we've got a Twitter account and an Instagram account. The first one is at NCAAEC for Twitter, and then for Instagram, it's at Play College Sports. A brief aside here, there's an external group called the National Letter of Intent Program. Their website is nationalletter.org, and it has all of the information about that program. It's technically not part of the NCAA, though we do partner with them. And so if you ever hear of a student saying that they signed to play with a school, that probably means that they signed a national letter of intent. And that's a very specific document that has scholarship implications. So if you have any questions about that document itself or that program, you would want to visit nationalletter.org, and it explains all of the information about that specific program. A couple more resources for everybody. Number one, we have our guide for the college-bound student athlete. That's just a great guide in general, provide lots of information about while you are in high school, maybe what you should be doing to make sure that you stay on track to become a student athlete. It also contains a wealth of information about our recruiting rules. There are very specific times when NCAA coaches are allowed to talk to high school athletes, and that guide lays out all of those timelines very specifically. All of our rules change a little bit per sport, so you'll want to check the guide and see what your sport says and when coaches can speak to you. The nice part for students is always that they can reach out to a coach at any time without any risk of getting in trouble. There's no penalty if a student reaches out to a coach. The worst case scenario for that student would be that the coach would not be able to speak to that student quite yet. Usually the student is not far enough along in their education. They're not old enough to be talked to and recruited yet. And so if a student reaches out and they're not able to talk to the coach right then the worst thing that happens is the coach just can't talk to them. So that's the guide for the college-bound student athlete. It's a great resource, especially for recruiting. For international students in particular, we also have another document, which is our 2019-20 Guide to International Academic Standards for Athletics Eligibility. We call it the International Guide for short. That is the document that lists all of our country-specific policies for every country on Earth. We have most countries at this point. Some smaller countries we don't have yet, but Brazil is definitely a country we have policies for. So if you're curious how our policies correspond to Brazil or any other country, definitely take a look at that guide. It'll have all of that information and lay that out specifically for you. New for 2019-2020, we have created international specific web pages. Those specific web pages are for every country that we have policies for. You can see the link there on the bottom of the page that will take you to the South America list of countries. And then if you click on the Brazil entry, you'll see something that looks like this. So here is the Brazil specific web page, and that lists links to all of our resources that are specific for Brazil, as well as providing any general information or tips that we have about the country. So that's a great resource for everybody to look at, maybe bookmark. These are brand new web pages for us, so we are constantly updating them with new information as we can. So it's definitely something worth bookmarking and checking in on from time to time, because there may be something new that we post there that wasn't there before. That being said, the website is not exclusive, so all of the links to the resources are really where you're going to find the best information. So those are very handy to just maybe download and keep on file, so that way you can reference them when you need to. But not to worry, the website is not going anywhere, so if you ever need them, they're always available to you. So I mentioned the international guide. I mentioned that it has all of our country-specific policies for each country. This is what it looks like for Brazil. So you see here that we have a standard academic calendar for Brazil. We expect the Brazilian school year to run between January and December, with students graduating in December. Per our policies, year 9 is year 1, or the first year of the ensino medio. Portuguese is the native language. And you see there that we have an expected graduation timeline for Brazilian students. We expect them to do 8 years of primary school and then 3 years of secondary school. Now we definitely understand that the final year of the Ensino Fundamental is very often referred to as the year 9 or the 9th year. Per our policies, we consider year 9 to be the 8th academic year for Brazilians. I know it gets confusing really quickly, I apologize. But just so you know, again, really the only thing that we're focused on in terms of academics is the medio. So only what we consider to be years 9 through 11 or upper secondary school, those are really the only years that we are generally concerned with. You can see it on our list, we do have lots of different acceptable forms of proof of high school graduation. A little while ago, I talked about every student that wants to be eligible needs to present acceptable proof of graduation. And here in our international guide is the complete list of documents from Brazil that we consider to be acceptable proof of graduation. Now, if you do not earn Brazilian proof of graduation, that's okay. You can earn acceptable proof of graduation from any other country as well, including acceptable, like a US high school diploma would also be accepted. But this is just the full list of what we accept from Brazil. You can also see that we have specific crediting policies listed for Brazil. For Brazil, they are based entirely on the student's seat hours, and the full chart is listed there. So before I was talking about you need 16 core credits, and this is how you determine what we consider to be a core credit. If a student takes a course for 120 hours or more in a year, we award them 1 full credit. Very important to understand that we can only award a maximum of 1 credit per year per course. So if a student takes a course for 240 hours, we still can only award 1 credit for that course for that year. We also have our grading scale listed. Once we receive your documents and evaluate them, we will have to convert your Brazilian grades into US grade equivalents, which are listed there on the right. Way back earlier in the presentation, I mentioned you have to have a grade point average of 2.30 or higher, generally to be eligible. The way that works in terms of the US grading scale is that an A is worth 4 points, a B is worth 3 points, a C is worth 2 points, and a D is worth 1 point. So what we do is we take your 16 best core credit grades that fit the appropriate breakdown. So 4 English, 3 math, 2 science. We take all of the best grades that you have, we average those grades to come up with the grade point average. All you really need to know is if you average a B average, so in Brazilian grades, if you generally get between a 7 and an 8.9 or better, you're usually going to be okay. It's not always the case, but as long as you're staying above a 7 with most of your grades, that's usually where you want to try to be. So if you're trying to set goals for yourself, aim for a 7 or better if possible. We also have specifically approved core course lists for every country in our international guide. If you see here on the screen, the only course we have specifically approved for Brazil is writing. We would consider a course title of writing to be an acceptable English course. If you have specific questions about any course title that appears on your document, is this course going to be considered a core course or not? Absolutely reach out to us and ask us. We have policies for all of that written down. We can tell you that information very easily. It just gets a little complicated to try to explain it. So rather than try to explain it to everybody, much easier just to ask us individually, and we're happy to walk you through that. So in addition to all of our academic resources, we have a whole host of amateurism resources. Amateurism is what we were talking about earlier, talking about delaying your graduation from secondary school, maybe taking a gap year, maybe playing with a particular club or using a scholarship agent or anything like that. Those are all amateurism issues, and we have this website available that I really recommend everybody check out if they have questions. It contains complete resources for almost every single amateurism issue that we generally review, and it'll tell you what the rule is, it'll tell you what's okay, and then what to avoid. Again, if you ever have any questions about your situation, always ask us, but this is a great resource for everybody if they have just some general questions, or maybe they just want to know the answer themselves. This website has just a ton of information about all of our amateurism rules. So I talked about it a little bit earlier, but now I just want to dig into our recruiting rules in a little more detail. So there are many recruiting services which may offer to assist you in the college recruiting process. It is permissible to use recruiting services. However, there's some definite things to watch out for to not do. You cannot sign an agreement with a service in which you promise to pay them based on your placement at a U.S. college institution or your receipt of an athletic scholarship. What that means is if you are going to use a recruiting service, it is generally okay if they charge a flat fee. Say they charge $500 and they will help you get recruited. That's generally okay. What would not be okay is if they said, pay us $100 now, and then if you get a scholarship, then pay us $400 more. That would generally not be okay. So again, always ask us if you're curious, but that's the general breakdown. Flat fee, generally okay. Anything that's conditioned on whether you get a scholarship or not, that should be avoided. Also, very importantly, you do not want to let any recruiting service or agent fill out any NCAA form on your behalf as the student. Only the student ends up getting punished or held accountable if false information is provided to the NCAA. We have no way of penalizing recruiting services because they're outside of our organization. And so ultimately, the student may suffer, may lose their scholarship, may not be able to compete if forms get filled out on their behalf incorrectly. So we had mentioned it before that coaches can only make recruiting contacts when students are a certain academic year in high school and during certain times of year. And these are the following written rules and just some American language that corresponds to these individual years. We say that 9th grade in the US is the freshman year, 10th grade is the sophomore year, and 11th grade is the junior year. We do not think, per our policies, Brazil does not have a 12th grade, so there is no Brazilian senior year. So per our policies, if you're in the first year of secondary school in Brazil, first year of the ensino medio, that would be your freshman year. The second year of the medio would be your sophomore year, and then the third year would be your junior year. There's a link to that guide for the college-bound student athlete, again, that has all of the charts, because the chart for one sport may be different than the chart for another sport in terms of when coaches can contact students and how. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to review it in the guide. Like I said before, worst case scenario is you reach out to a coach and then the coach just can't talk to you yet because it's not the right time. No risk to the student for reaching out to a coach. Students never get in trouble for that. So we've been talking a lot about recruiting and when coaches can call and when you can be contacted. Here's what the breakdown of what it looks like in the guide for the college-bound student athlete. And as you can see from this chart, there's going to be a different date for each type of contact per sport, per division. So sometimes it's okay for coaches to send recruiting materials or emails, Sometimes it's okay for them to call. Sometimes it's okay for them to call the student. Sometimes it's okay for students to visit campus. And then sometimes it's okay for the coaches to visit the students off campus, meaning not at the NCAA school. So there's just a wealth of differences between all of these things. The full list for each sport is in the guide for the college-bound student athlete if you need more information on that. This is a very, very important slide to take note of, especially if you're a student. The most important part of the process to becoming a student athlete is promoting yourself. Most US college athletes, meaning most of the 500,000 NCAA athletes that are enrolled at our schools right now, promoted themselves to coaches in order to be recruited. That means they proactively reached out to the coaches and said, you know, I'm interested in playing for you on your team. Here's my contact information. Here's a video of me playing. Here's my resume or my CV that has all of my athletic and academic information. And that is always going to be the most important part for every student, is to promote themselves to the coaches and the schools they want to attend first and foremost. Some colleges use specific recruiting services or just recruiting services in general, and then some don't. But it's very important to understand that recruiting services are not necessary. They are completely optional, and students that choose to use a recruiting service are at no more of an advantage than students that don't choose to use a recruiting service. The most important thing is always that the student actively promotes themselves. This is also a very important slide, and that is to do your research. I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that there are over 1,100 NCAA schools offering sports in the United States, and that's just the NCAA. There are other sports associations out there that govern different schools. So there are thousands and thousands of schools that offer sports in the United States. But beyond sports, you should also really consider academics. So when you're looking to attend a school, you should ask, does the school offer a program or a major that you are interested in? Again, the question for, I apologize if there's a little static right now, we've got someone with an open mic. The question for the admissions department is, does the student need to take the EUA? Will you fit in academically at the school you'd like to attend? And then there's always a question of, do you want to go to the best or highest rated school possible, but you also don't want to get in over your head? You always want to consider that as an option, because you never, it's up to every student how hard they want to push themselves academically, and what they want their ultimate career to look like. When you're considering athletics, there are also many different factors to consider. You should definitely ask coaches about the time commitment for their school and their individual sport. You'll want to talk to the coaches about their coaching style and maybe whether that fits with your personality as a person or as an athlete. And then last, it's very important to also talk to them about travel. Some schools travel great distances to compete. So that means their athletes are spending their weekends traveling from one US state to another in order to compete. Other schools travel very short distances to compete and maybe stay within the same state primarily. So that's also important to understand. If maybe you're really interested in travel, or maybe you really don't want to travel very much, those are great questions to ask. And there are also other intangibles that are worth discussing with your NCAA school. Do you prefer to live in a big city or a small town? Or do you prefer a large or small school? As just a random example, some of our largest schools have tens of thousands of students. I think the current largest school has about 70,000 or so students. And then some of our smallest schools are going to have maybe less than 1,000 total students. Some are going to be in the heart or downtown of major US cities, and other schools are going to be out in more rural areas of any particular state. Also important to mention that just like Brazil, the United States is a very large country in terms of geography. So the weather can be very different from one US state to another. If you go to school in Alaska, you're probably going to have a very different experience than a student that goes to school in Florida, for example. So if you have a particular climate that you're interested in, a particular setting that you're interested in, those are all great questions to ask your school that you're interested in attending, and they'll be able to tell you exactly what life is like at their school. So here's some more questions you can ask when you're visiting campus. You don't have to ask about all of these, but these are some good ones if you're looking for good questions to ask. You want to maybe talk to them about academic resources on campus. Do they have tutors available to student athletes? Do they have someone in their international department maybe that speaks Portuguese that you would be able to easily communicate with if you're having problems with translations? You would want to talk to them very specifically about scholarship renewals. Each school is going to be governed by slightly different rules that are going to determine whether scholarship renewals are automatic or whether they are more of a year-to-year situation. So that's a great question to ask. You definitely want to talk to them about financial aid and cost of attendance. When we talk about getting an athletic scholarship, that means that you're hoping to get some part of your US education paid for by the NCAA school itself. But that does not necessarily mean that they will provide what is often referred to as a full ride scholarship. A full ride scholarship would be where everything is paid for the student, but maybe the school only gives you $10,000 in scholarship per year. You would then want to figure out how much more the rest of the experience costs. Maybe the entire experience costs $12,000 and you're only on the hook for $2,000 per year. And then you would know that. Conversely, it may cost $40,000 or $50,000 total per year, and then you would have to pay $30,000 or $40,000 extra dollars in that instance. So definitely very important to talk about financial aid, cost of attendance, and everything financial up front, so that way you know what you're getting into. Other great questions to ask are about admissions requirements. All of the academic information we discussed earlier is only what's required to be an NCAA athlete when you go straight from high school to your NCAA school. Every single school is also going to have their own admissions requirements, and those are their academic requirements to be admitted to that school. So you may be an NCAA eligible athlete, but you may not be able to get admitted to any particular school. I know when I applied for college here in the United States, I applied to probably 20 or 30 different schools, and I was actually only admitted to about 5 or 10 of those schools. So it really varies depending on the student and where you want to go as to what, where you can and can't get admitted. Other great questions, talk about study abroad or internship opportunities, talk about athletic training and medical expenses. Some schools will cover your medical expenses and some will not. So if you happen to get injured while being an athlete, sometimes your medical bills are paid for and sometimes they are not. Very important to know about the United States. I'm sure most international people know this, but we do not have universal health care in the United States, and very often healthcare can be very expensive. So important to maybe figure out up front who will be covering medical expenses if you do get hurt. Great questions to talk about are about degree programs and courses of study and graduation rates, so that you can make sure that you're engaging in a course of study that interests you, but then is also viable from that particular school. Some schools specialize in certain subjects and don't specialize in other subjects. So if you maybe really like the coach or the team at one school, you'll also want to consider whether that school offers a course of study that you're interested in. We've talked about all of these a little bit before, but team time demands is very important. Some schools and some teams are going to be more demanding on your time than others. You want to talk about on-campus housing, what that looks like. Again, it's going to be a little bit different for every school. Many schools offer multiple different options for on-campus student housing, but to learn the specifics about that, you would have to talk to the individual schools themselves. So we've talked about this before too, but obviously you want to get to know the coaches. So you want to talk about coaching styles and their philosophy. You want to talk to them about injuries, rehabilitation, that ties into the medical expenses, their school's graduation rates, time management, and then also very importantly, you can talk to them about playing time. Some students are okay going and being a part of a team even if they don't get to play very often. Other times it's very important for students that they really want to play. If you're very upfront and talk to coach about that, usually they'll be very receptive and can usually tell you pretty directly whether they think you'll get a lot of playing time on their team or whether maybe there's somebody else that is going to get that playing time first. Also, there's a reminder here on the side. I talked about it before, but you do have to get admitted to the NCAA school you want to play for before you play for them. Just because you are an eligible NCAA athlete does not necessarily mean that you will be admitted to the school you would like to play for. So you do have to do both, be NCAA eligible and admitted.
Vince, can I interrupt for 1 second just to reinforce to a few people are asking here under the chat if we will be sending the presentation. They might have arrived a little later when we started, so I just want to tell everybody that we will be sending the presentation to the advisors of the binational centers, and you will get an email from NCAA with links to the information that Vince is providing here. All this information is so useful. Vince, thank you so much. This is wonderful. You are really getting to the approach we use with Education USA and the best fit idea that we have about selecting the schools, and also we really appreciate. We still have a few questions here. When you were done, we can summarize them for you, okay?
Absolutely, perfect. We are getting towards the end, so I appreciate everyone sticking with me. I know this is a lot of information to digest.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah, all very useful. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Absolutely, no problem. So here's just some information about what to send to any particular NCAA school that you're interested in attending. Always a good idea to send a cover letter or an email expressing your interest in that particular school or team. Good idea to send them your academic information, your TOEFL, SAT, ACT scores, and transcripts. And also not a bad idea to send them a resume or a CV or curriculum vitae with your stats or results included. It is very important to know that as part of the Eligibility Center registration process, you will send your transcripts to us. And a great way for schools to be able to easily look at your academic record is if you have registered at eligibilitycenter.org and submitted your documents to us. Any school that wants to recruit you can see any documents that you've submitted to us, and they can see your complete academic and amateurism evaluations that we've completed at any given time. So almost always the very first thing a coach is going to do if you contact them is they're going to check and see if you've registered with the Eligibility Center. That way they can easily see all of your information in one easy place. Last but not least, we get asked a lot about whether we at the Eligibility Center post stats or videos or statistics, sports measurements, results, anything like that. We do not. We only ask about academic information, and the only thing available through our website will be your academic information and your answers to our amateurism questions. Any statistics or videos, you would want to share those with the coach directly yourself, because they would not come to us. So we had talked about this a little bit earlier, but I just want to reinforce, you may receive several different possible offers from any NCAA school. They may offer you an athletic scholarship. That means that all or part of your costs are being paid and a commitment is being made to you. So an athletic scholarship means you are receiving money to come to a US school, which is always going to be in the form of a discount to the total cost of attending that school itself. They may offer you a spot as a recruited walk-on. That means that they are offering you a spot on the team, but they are not giving you a scholarship. Very important here to understand that if you are offered a recruited walk-on spot, that you are just taking the coach's word for that. There is no official promise from the school to offer you a spot on the team, and there is no penalty for them if you do not get a spot on the team. Very similar with an athletic scholarship, that's always going to guarantee that you get some money to come to your US school, but the coach still has complete control over who plays on the team at any given point in time, and they can change their mind when they want to. They can't change their mind about the money they decide to give you or the scholarship they give you, but they can change their mind about who gets to play at any given time. And last but not least, you might be offered a spot as an unrecruited walk-on or as a tryout. That means you would then go to the school as a regular student and try out for the team as if you were any other student. That is totally up to you. Generally, it's going to be advisable to go down that path if you are really confident that you want to get on that particular team at that school. But more than that, it would be very important that you want to attend that school as a student, because you may or may not ultimately actually make the team. So very, very important just to be watching out for those terms in case you do get offered something by an NCAA school. All right, we are almost done. I am just going to get into our resources and talk about how you can contact us. If you have any questions, doesn't matter who you are, you can click on this link and that'll take you to our international contact form. What that does is that allows you to send us an email and we can answer any question that you ask. If we cannot answer your question for some specific reason, we will let you know exactly why we can't answer it, and we will direct you to who can answer it or what resource answers the questions for you. More often than not, though, we are able to answer any question you have. Again, at the very least, we'll be able to tell you who can answer that question for you. And that is it. So I'm just going to go back to here.
Wow, that was very detailed, and it shows how important it is for the students to get started as soon as they feel they are eligible, right? Following the timelines you mentioned in the presentation. Of course, it's a long-term commitment, not even before, if you think of all the preparation, right? In terms of academics and the sports qualification, but it's something feasible if you are determined and a hard worker. And we really appreciate all this information. So I'm saying here again that we will have this session recorded, but all the participants will get a follow-up email from NCAA with the links to all this information that was provided here. Now, before we finish, and then actually before we go to the questions, I want to remind the students that are here or the public that is interested in applying that EducationUSA counts with a network of 39 centers all over the country. If you go to our website, educationusa.org.br, you will find in os centros onde estamos, by state, by city, and you can email the advisors, and we do also online advising, and more than ever, it's great if you can come and talk to one advisor from Education USA to discuss all the steps you have to follow and also the qualifications you need to meet to apply to a regular college in the US, and then concurrently look at the NCAA eligibility process. So I will just summarize the questions here. We have a few that are more general, like the one from Mateus asking you, Vince, what do you think about the international students? It's a general question, but I mean, I think from your perspective as a US organization.
Sure. So, I mean, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, I've been working exclusively with international students for about the last 4 years, and I absolutely love the opportunity that we can afford to international students. It's one thing to have a student in the US end up going to a US college or university, but it can be really life-changing for an international student to be able to come to an NCAA school. So I think the opportunity is great. We love our international students. Of the 100,000 student athletes that register with us every year, about 10,000 or more are international at this point. So we have many international students, and yeah, we always love the opportunity that it presents to both of us to get to know each other.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's reciprocal, right? The same way it's a great opportunity for internationals, it's also wonderful for the university campuses to get diverse student population and get all the intercultural interactions that come out of this experience, right?
Absolutely.
So, yes. So Cristina is one of our advisors from Fortaleza. She asked to get examples of sports that NCAA covers. I think it might be the divisions, I think, also. Can
Sure,
you tell
absolutely.
the sports that are more common? Yeah.
So the sports, I believe, are almost the same across Division 1, 2, and 3. Very minor differences maybe between them, but essentially the easiest way for me to explain it is if you can think of something that would be considered a major worldwide sport, it is likely covered by the NCAA. So that includes soccer, tennis, basketball. We sponsor women's rowing, but not men's rowing. Even though many of our NCAA schools do have men's rowing programs. But essentially, if you can think of something that you would consider to be a major sport, it's very likely covered by us or governed by our rules. If you do have a question about your sport in particular, though, absolutely use the contact form there, and we can let you know with specificity whether we cover a sport or not. Because we do offer 24 different sports. Sometimes we have women's sports that we don't offer on the men's side, and sometimes there are men's sports we don't offer on the women's side. But in general, we can answer that for you. And if it's a major sport, it's probably covered by us.
Sure, thank you. There is an interesting question from William here. A recommendation from the NCAA will help me get admitted in a college with or without a scholarship?
So we don't make recommendations for any given student, but if you complete our eligibility process and are certified as an academic qualifier, which means you met our academic requirements, and you're certified as an amateur athlete, that is usually very helpful in the recruiting and eligibility process. It's not necessarily a requirement. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't work out that way, and we have many policies and processes, and if you do not meet our requirements to help you maybe get there. But it is something that coaches and schools are generally looking for, is for you to have successfully completed our eligibility process.
We have a question from Mariana Panero, our advisor in Rio, at PUC Rio. Is it possible for a transfer student or a student that took a gap year to be recruited for a Division I team?
Sure. So I don't know if they were referring to transfer student, meaning from one post-secondary school to another, like from one U.S. college to another U.S. college, or from...
It might be someone that comes from another college overseas. I don't know if Mariana is still on, but I can see that she's connected. Mariana, if you want to pose your question more completely, please. Because we get this type of inquiry here, Vince, from students that are already in college and we're hoping they could transfer to a college in the US and then apply for Division I.
Absolutely. Well, I'll go through both scenarios. I see that Eduardo had asked a question about US high schools earlier. So I think that's useful to touch base on. If a student, I'll start with the college transfer or university transfer first. Our rules are just different for students that come as a transfer from one university to an NCAA school. Generally, everything I talked about today reviewed a student's high school academic record. If you are a transfer student, usually the more important thing at that point is your university academic record. So it's just important to understand that distinction. If you maybe were not the greatest high school student, you can then go to a university and then transfer to an NCAA school. And usually the most important thing is how well you did at university and not high school at that point. To touch base on the coming to the United States to attend high school, I know that's something we see more and more from international students and Brazilian students in general. That is also very, very possible and happens very regularly. The most important thing for Brazilian students to be thinking about is the difference in our academic calendars. So students that start school in Brazil will always be expected to graduate in December of a given year. Either that's going to be in December of when they should have originally completed their ensino medio, or if they come to the United States, often they're expected to graduate one semester earlier than their US student counterparts. So if you are considering coming to the United States as a high school athlete, we encourage that. It absolutely can happen, but you definitely want to check with us to make sure that you're staying on track on the right timeline, because that is something that has caught people off guard in the past when they didn't realize that they would be expected to graduate on the Southern Hemisphere calendar, even though they come to the Northern Hemisphere.
Yes, that's a challenge indeed. And actually, we have a question from advisor Simone from PUC Rio. When is the right time for a Brazilian student to look for sports scholarship opportunities? So it also has to do with the timeline and the different calendars, right? Academic calendars.
Absolutely. So all of our academic calendars are originally based on Northern Hemisphere timeline students. However, they do not change. So earlier in the presentation, I talked about the guide for the college-bound student athlete having charts with dates. Those dates are going to be the same for Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere students. And so they just need to review the chart. The general rule of thumb is students in their first year of high school are often not able to have direct contact with NCAA coaches, but then contacts become more readily available as they are sophomores or juniors, or if they're in their 10th and then 11th years, or second and third year of ensino medio. It's different for everybody though, and it never hurts to reach out early, because the worst thing that can happen is the coach just can't talk to you right then. Right.
We have another question from Erica Elena. Would the student that failed the 9th grade have any chance of qualifying for a Division I college?
Yes. We are generally only concerned with failed or repeated grades from years 9 and up, but before I had talked about our delayed enrollment rules. Normally students get depending on the sport, for all sports other than tennis, usually you get 1 year after high school before you're expected to enroll at your NCAA school. If a student fails a grade in high school, usually that means that they just do not get that extra year after high school. They would want to enroll right away at their NCAA school to avoid any penalty. But if you have failed a grade or need to repeat a grade, definitely reach out to us and we can walk you through your specific situation, because the answer for one student may be slightly different for another student. But don't give up hope. It's definitely okay, and can easily work out as long as you know what you need to be doing.
Okay. We have another question from Mateus that I'm not sure is clear. Soccer international student for college, that any division, what the US think about it? I think if we are talking about the soccer scholarship.
Sure. So so again, only NCAA Division 1 and 2 schools offer athletic scholarships, but all 3 divisions, NCAA Division 1, 2, and 3, have men's and women's soccer programs available at most schools. Not all schools offer all sports, so every school is going to be a little bit different, but the overwhelming majority of schools, I think, offer soccer programs for both men and women, though each school would be a little bit different, so you'd have to check and see if the school you want to go to offers soccer programs. But in general, soccer is a very popular sport at NCAA schools, and certainly international soccer players are in high demand, and we have, I think, a majority of our international athletes at this point play soccer. So it's I think the most common sport for international athletes.
True. Yeah, well, we have 2 more final questions. And before that, I think you note from Rita Morricone saying that this was an extraordinary presentation. It was very nice to meet you, and she will send all the presentation to all the advisors in South America. So wonderful. You know that you will be far away. That's wonderful, right? We're spreading the word.
I appreciate Rita and all of you as well, and thank you very much.
Yeah, so the final one here, well, there are 2 comments. When is the right time to contact Division 1 soccer coaches for a Brazilian? I think you mentioned that depending on the year the student is, right? You had a slide about it.
Correct, and I do not know off the top of my head the very specific date when soccer athletes can contact Division 1 coaches, but it is included in the guide for the college-bound student athlete. Yeah. So if you click on the link in the resources in this presentation, you can find it. Also, it's generally pretty easy if you just do a Google search for NCAA guide for the college-bound student athlete. As long as it takes you to our website, that should get you to the right document, and all of that information is in there.
Perfect. And finally, there is a question from Dan Castro. Hi, Vince, could you please get into more details about the amateurism criteria and proactive sports education training? The time period prior to the application. I think you also have a link about that certification, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I will do my best. The problem with discussing amateurism certifications, there were several slides earlier that link to our resources. We have very, very dense rule books for each of our divisions that covers all of our rules, and the amateurism rules are many, many pages. And it's very dense, detailed, almost legal language in those rule books. So it's very difficult in a very brief presentation to go into all of those specifics. But again, the basic things that we're looking for is when you graduated high school versus when you want to enroll at your NCAA school, whether you've ever been paid as a professional athlete in your sport, and then whether you've ever signed any agreements or contracts with any agents or recruiting services. So those are really the main things. Again, all of the details are on our website, but I've left up the slide that has our contact information. If you have specific questions about your situation, please reach out to us first. It's always better to ask up front about an amateurism issue than to discover after the fact that something was against our rules, because oftentimes the penalty is much harder to satisfy than it would have been just to avoid the situation to begin with.
Sure. I think this ends the presentation. I really appreciate we had a 1 hour and 15 minutes presentation. It was a great job. Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you again to Elizabeth Thompson for making this presentation possible. We will stay in touch with you. We will send you the email addresses so you have the follow-up with everybody. Thank you so much, Dennis.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Boa tarde. Have a nice afternoon. Uma boa tarde a todos. Obrigada pela participação. Até a próxima.